Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bigfoot Forensics. Today, we're going to be talking about the importance of properly documenting and photographing your foot impressions. I think since that seems to be the main thing that we're really going after right now, besides recordings and hand impressions and such, but the big goal seems to be documenting those feet and the impressions that they leave, right? So stick around. We're going to be talking about the proper way to do this and the benefits therein. So what's pretty cool about my agency is we take in interns, and they have to go through all the different steps within the department so they can learn all the different aspects. They come in thinking we have phones where you just put your finger on it and you see the little picture of the person's face spin and spin and spin, and then all of a sudden, bam, there's your criminal, their criminal history. Then they can do that with DNA, just stick it in, and 30 seconds later, you have a match. A lot of that is coming to fruition, but it's not quite there yet. And those were some examples that are actually getting fairly close, but they think it's a lot of running and gunning. So anyway, what I was saying is for our interns, sometimes they get kind of down when they realize how much documentation and paperwork that's involved. And truly, the documentation aspect of the job can get a little monotonous at times. But I'll tell you, when it turns out that you need it later, especially when you're in court, you're going to be glad that you did it this way and that you did it the same way every time. That's why we have standards that we follow. But in the Bigfoot community, I'm noticing we don't really have any standards, which means there's no transparency, which leads to a lack of credibility. So I think one of the largest hurdles that today's Bigfoot investigators face, especially with the public in general, is credibility. So how do we get back to credibility and begin to thwart off some of that skepticism? I think to do this, our investigations must be grounded in practices that lend credibility to our findings. And that, my friends, would be a rigorous documentation of every sighting, every piece of evidence, and every track. A meticulous and methodical approach ensures that our findings can be taken seriously by the scientific community and the general public alike. If law enforcement's documenting a footwear impression from a burglary more thoroughly than that of someone trying to document an undiscovered non-human primate, then we have a huge problem. So let's look at the minimum of what should be done. Should we find what we suspect may be a Bigfoot foot impression? The first thing we have to do is put our scene into context. And when I say scene, I mean the location of your evidence. So what is context? Let's use this definition: the set of circumstances or facts that surround a particular event or situation. All right, so we've all seen this type of photo with a caption that says something to the effect of, "I saw this on the trail the other day. What do you think?" Well, when we place photographs in a context, we provide a richer understanding of the scene. A lone footprint could belong to anyone or anything, but a series of photographs showing the footprint and its environment tells a better story. Was it found near a river, in a dense forest, or at the edge of a subdivision, neighborhood kind of thing? Context answers these questions and so much more, making our photos not just images, but narratives. Contextual photographs add a layer of transparency to any investigation. Now let's see what happens when we're transparent in its location by taking a series of what we call overall photographs that puts the entire scene into context. Okay, so these next photographs, they're going to be a series of overlapping images moving around the evidence. If possible, this will be done all the way around. So as you can see in this particular photograph, I marked my evidence with a pink flag. Just one of those simple little contractor flags, right? Or the ones that mark pipes and gas lines, things like that. So why are we doing this? We're doing this so we can show where the evidence is. We're being transparent because its location is what it is. And we have to do this with every crime scene, indoors or out. Obviously, a trail with trees on either side or rock walls on the sides limits the 360-degree series of photos. However, several from different distances looking up and down the trail toward the evidence will serve the same idea. Its location has to be put into context. All right, so I want you to note in this particular picture that my evidence is down in the left-hand corner. And there's a reason for this. Sometimes we have to put our evidence into context, where it is in relation to something else that's on the scene, such as that signpost that's right there. So one of the things that we would have to do is you couldn't just line it up in the center. You'd have them overlapping each other, straight on, right? Now, you kind of want to give them a perspective in the photograph. So you're telling a story. It's from here to here. So what's happening here is we're moving in a little bit closer, and we're starting to take what we call mid-range shots. And it's before we get up close and personal with our evidence. And this is important because we're still putting things into context. So I can tell you that from past experiences during these mid-range shots, that we were able to locate other things of interest where we are able to zoom in. And I'm going to show you why you can't zoom in from the overall, the 360 photographs in a little bit. So we go from 360, putting everything into context, to our mid-range shots, and we slowly start to get closer and closer. So if you haven't noticed yet, the pink flag has an item number on it. I've labeled it item number 1. And this is so we can refer to it later in our report as item number 1, should there be multiple pieces of evidence, So in this particular photograph, this may be one that you may choose to use measurements. So maybe I want to triangulate my position of my evidence using the corners of this gravel lot right here. Now, typically we're going to be trying to find what we call like a hard or a permanent structure, something like that, like the corner of a building, a giant boulder, something like that, that hopefully years from now is still going to be there. So it might become important because maybe one day we have to revisit this location for more research, and we want to show exactly where this was. Now, for us, sometimes we take a piece of rebar and we put it straight into the ground and we cover it up. That way you can find it with a metal detector later. And how would we find it later if it was in the middle of the woods? Well, we would take a series of recordings for what our coordinates would be, using 2 different devices, different ways, if not, different times, maybe take a few steps, take another one. But we want to do it a couple of different times. I've seen some coordinates come back wrong, especially in some reconstructions I've done for other agencies where they submitted their findings, and I plug in coordinates, and all of a sudden there's like a bone that's like a mile away. So yeah, you just have to double check and be mindful about what you're recording. But we definitely want to record where the evidence is so we can revisit it later if we have to. Anyway, the main point that I'm trying to make here is we have to address the fact that if this is a significant piece of evidence, we may have to physically revisit the location for reconstruction or research purposes. So then we move closer and we ultimately get to this point. So I want you to take a particular good look at this shoe impression because I want you to notice a few things. It's not at an angle. It's not from a distance. What's happened here is the camera is parallel to the plane, parallel to the surface, and I filled the entire frame up. So this is super important. So it starts off with footwear examiners, right? What we're looking for are different characteristics and things within the footwear impression that we can use to compare to other things. So you might be saying, what does that have to do with Bigfoot? How about how many different types of foot impressions have you seen? Different casts, all different kinds, different sizes, crooked toes, some with possible dermal ridges. In fact, we might be missing some of those dermal ridges by not taking close-up shots like this. But I got one step for you even further. This honestly shouldn't be where we stop. We shouldn't be coming here, taking the photo and going, man, that's awesome. Now, I'll grant it. No one's really doing this or getting this close and this clear. And it's something that we should be doing. But there's a next step before we get to casting. And I'm going to tell you why. Say someone like me, a latent fingerprint examiner, friction ridge examiner, sees something within your photo, and I say, oh my God, I need to look at that. And I zoom in and it becomes pixelated, right? We've all seen those. You try to zoom in, it becomes pixelated. So the next step on this is, remember how we did the 360-degree pictures and we got everything in context? So we're going to do the same thing now. We're actually going to divide this foot impression up into different sections, like so. And then we're going to move around and we're going to take a photograph of each section. Now, there's going to come a point where your scale that you originally put in is going to disappear. So try to refrain from moving that scale around, because what you're going to do is from start to finish, from those 360-degree photos that you took to the mid-range shots to that initial close-up shot, that scale has been in one particular place. So now if you start moving it around, I could accidentally start thinking some of these details are in different places. So what you would do is you would add a different scale, hopefully in a different color or something like that, such as this. So what happens if while doing that and you're doing your examination, you run across some dermal ridges or something really interesting within the print? Well, we're going to add a scale and we're going to label that section its own item number. We're going to give it its own item number. And what we're going to do is we're going to give it, like, remember the first item was item number 1. So now it's going to be item number 1A, 1B, 1C, or 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. But no matter what, it's always going to begin with 1. So we know that we're referencing item number 1. I hope that makes sense, because if we had item number 2, it'd be 2.1 and so on, or 2B and so on. So you're going to come in and do this. So this is a prime example, this picture, and I did this on purpose to show you what happens if you don't have the camera parallel to the surface. You see how it goes from clear or in focus to kind of fuzzy to the right. So this can be a problem, especially if you're at a much steeper angle. You can actually start distorting things, and you can make things look smaller or bigger than they appear, which is a bad thing. We need parallel to the surface. That way we can say that it looked exactly the way it was when we found it. So in this next slide, you're going to see the first close-up picture we took of the footprint. So we have our first close-up picture that we took that looks super clear, which is awesome. And then I say, I need to zoom in and take a look at it. And what's the first thing that I see? Everything becomes pixelated. So remember those series of shots that I took when you come in a little closer. Remember, you're not zooming in with the camera. You're moving the camera closer to take those pictures. So I want you to see, here's a side-by-side. So what happens when the impression isn't cooperating? There's several things that we can do. The first thing we're going to do, especially in the daytime, is we're going to try to create some shade. First, we're going to document it the same way we documented everything, 360 degrees, give it an item number, show it in context, do all those things that you would normally do. This right here is just as an example. Normally, I would have the little flag and my scales and everything. So this is it looking down into it with the sun blaring down on it. It's almost midday. It's about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So there is a slight shade. So around noon, it would be almost, I wouldn't say impossible, but it would be very hard to see this. So what happens next? What I did was, oh, look, I did add a scale. So I added a scale, I created some shadow. Now we can see it a little bit better. It's still not great. So what's the next step? If we're in the woods, we should all be carrying flashlights. Okay. So the next step is we're going to add what's called oblique lighting. It's just lighting shooting from the side, hitting those ridges and creating a shadow on the other side. That's all we're doing. So I know it can be problematic, especially with the types of flashlights that we're carrying. Some of them may not be powerful enough, or some of them you think are too powerful. Or so remember, it's not entirely necessary that we get the entire impression perfect, right? Because remember what the end result is going to be. We're going to divide it into sections, and we're going to photograph it that way. So you have to get creative sometimes to create your shadow. That first time that I was creating the shadow, I was standing there. But then I quickly realized that I need to be able to move around, bend down, and basically work the impression, right? So this is something that we typically do. We use an umbrella. Or if you have a big backpack, since you're out doing anything, moving around, you can use that. Anything to create a shadow. So as you can see, this particular photograph is at an angle. We normally wouldn't be doing it that way. This is just for illustrative purposes of what it can look like before and what it can look like after with that side lighting. And then a little bit closer up. So I want you to keep in mind that this doesn't look as good as it could, and it's because of the substrate. It has nothing to do with the methods. This is a rocky, gravelly, crushed granite area. So this is about as good as you're going to get. So here's an example of sand versus the oblique lighting. So there's a couple of things I need to address. This is just the before, okay? I'm not suggesting at all that photographs take the place of casting or that they take the place of 3D imaging now. I'm saying it's one of three that we should be doing if we have the means. But definitely we have the means for photographing. And just so you know, all of those pictures that I took were with my phone. But combining all three things, casting, photographing, 3D imaging, all three of those things are probably going to capture something that the other didn't. So combining it all and doing it the same way every time is really what we're after. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.